Welcome to this week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. I'm John Strum, and I'm the host of the Real Talk MS podcast. Each week, Real Talk MS reaches thousands of people in more than 100 countries around the world with the news that people affected by MS need to know. My wife, Jean, lived with progressive MS for 23 years, so I've had a front row seat experiencing all the ways that MS can impact a family. Currently, I serve on the MS Society's Community Review of MS Research Committee. I'm a district activist leader and trustee for the National MS Society, and I chair the Society's California Government Relations Advisory Committee. The MS Society's Ask an MS Expert webcast is designed to give us a place for the MS community to connect and to connect you with experts who are ready to answer your questions on the topics that impact people affected by MS every day. Please feel free to post those comments and questions on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch. MS navigators are online throughout today's program, answering questions and connecting you to resources. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank today's contributing sponsors, Genentech and Novartis. Support from MS community partners helps the National MS Society reach its goal of providing up-to-date information and support through programs like Ask an MS Expert. Getting diagnosed with MS can be challenging. Not everyone experiences the typical symptoms of MS, and some of these symptoms can mimic those of other conditions, making the diagnostic process more difficult. Joining us today to discuss the common signs and symptoms of MS, as well as share strategies for being proactive throughout the diagnostic process, is Dr. Léorah Freeman. Dr. Freeman is the director of the Multiple Sclerosis and Neuroimmunology Center at Dell Medical School, the University of Texas at Austin, where she also leads the MS and Neuroimmunology Fellowship Program and the MS Imaging and Outcomes Research Laboratory. Her research focuses on the development of data-driven approaches to predict and improve the long-term outcomes of people living with MS. She's passionate about eliminating disparities in MS research and care, and routinely works with advocacy and community organizations to help people with MS thrive. Welcome, Dr. Freeman, and thanks for being with us today.
It's such a pleasure to be with you, John. Very excited to be here.
Well, why don't we start by talking about the process of diagnosing multiple sclerosis, and maybe the best place to start is with a definition. So tell me, what is multiple sclerosis and what are some of the common symptoms?
So MS is an inflammatory disease of the central nervous system. And what we call the central nervous system is the optic nerve, brain, and spinal cord. In the process of MS, the body's immune system attacks the myelin sheath, the protecting layers that covers the nerve fibers. And in this process of demyelination, this process causes a disruption of the flow of information between our nervous system and the rest of the body. And this can lead to a variety of different symptoms. Those symptoms will depend on where the damage occurs and how severe the damage is. So people with MS can, be affected by many different types of symptoms. For example, let's say the optic nerve are inflamed and there's demyelination in that area. They can experience visual symptoms of visual loss or blurry vision. Different areas of the brain can cause different symptoms of weakness of a limb or sensory changes, gait abnormalities, imbalance. We often see also bowel or bladder issues in people with MS. It's also important to remind folks that MS can cause a lot of invisible symptoms. There are symptoms people cannot see. Fatigue is one of them that's very common. Cognitive changes, difficulty with information processing and memory can also be a part of the MS journey.
What makes it difficult to diagnose MS, and how long could getting that diagnosis take?
So this has changed over time. I've been in practice now about 15 years, and even during the time of my career, our diagnostic criteria have changed, and this has allowed us to diagnose MS earlier and earlier in the course of disease. So today, in a person who experienced their first symptoms, if those symptoms that are recognized early and the right test, an MRI usually is ordered early in the course of symptoms, then people can receive a diagnosis fairly quickly, sometimes in a matter of days after onset of their symptoms. But we also see, and you're aware of that, we also see a lot of delays in the diagnosis of MS and misdiagnoses. And this is due to the fact that, MS causes a variety of symptoms. Different people with MS will have very different symptoms. And sometimes the doctors that patients see when they experience those first signs are not aware that those symptoms can be caused by MS, and sometimes order the wrong test, or even worse, will dismiss the person, blaming, anxiety or stress as being the cause of their problems. So that's a big reason why we see delays. Also, it's important to know that, MS is often diagnosed with imaging, with an MRI that shows bright spots that correspond to those lesions, that those areas where the myelin sheath is damaged. But there are other conditions that can also cause bright spots in the brain, such as migraines or vascular changes or other inflammatory conditions. And sometimes, the bright spots may be seen, but attributed to another condition, and that can lead to more diagnosis delay.
I know for many people, vision problems are often the first symptom of multiple sclerosis. What are some of the most common vision issues that individuals with MS might face?
Again, it depends of where people experience damage due to MS. If people experience issues with their optic nerve, they may have symptoms of what we call optic neuritis, that's causing blurry vision, blind spots in their vision, which we'll call scotoma, loss of vision. Pain with eye movement is very common. Changes in color vision, that's different. Sometimes people describe like a gray veil over their eye. Lesions in other parts of the brain, particularly the brainstem, can cause different kind of visual problems, double vision, difficulty coordinating the eyes together, or abnormal movement of the eye, something that we call in our jargon nystagmus.
Vanessa tells us that she recently saw a neurologist because she was experiencing blind spots and poor vision. She was diagnosed with clinically isolated syndrome, or CIS. What is CIS, and can CIS develop into multiple sclerosis?
Absolutely. So from what you describe, I would say this is kind of a very typical initial presentation of MS with what we call optic neuritis, and which is inflammation of the optic nerve. But sometimes people have optic neuritis, but don't have other findings consistent with MS or minimal findings. So they have an initial attack, but they don't fully validate the criteria for multiple sclerosis. And this is what we call CIS, clinically isolated syndrome. It's this first event that doesn't quite fully validate the criteria for MS. People who have CIS may develop MS later on. Particularly if they have some findings elsewhere in their central nervous system that is suggestive of MS. So let's say Vanessa has this inflammation of her optic nerve, but she also has a lesion in her brain. While she doesn't validate criteria for multiple sclerosis, we'll know she is at higher risk. Usually people who have lesions in their brain that accompanies their CIS have a risk of developing MS later on of about 60 to 80%. People who don't have any lesions have a lower risk, maybe around 20%. So this is really what we're trying to define when we see people with a first attack, is trying to identify, do they have MS or not? And if they don't, what is their risk of developing MS later on?
So if someone diagnosed with CIS begins a disease-modifying therapy, is it possible for them to prevent their CIS from developing into MS?
Absolutely. It's generally accepted now that people who have a CIS with other signs suggestive of MS, usually a brain lesion, it's recommended that we start disease-modifying therapy. It's because research trials have shown that we can not only prevent the occurrence of a second event, what we will call clinically definite MS, but we can also minimize the risk of later disability progression.
Numbness in the face or arms or legs is also one of the most common symptoms experienced by people who are diagnosed with MS. Carmen says she's experiencing numbness, tingling, and hypersensitivity in her feet. Her doctor has told her that it could be MS, but advised her to wait and see if other symptoms develop. How common is numbness and tingling in MS? And is there any treatment to relieve those symptoms while someone has yet to be diagnosed?
Yeah, this is really a very common symptoms that people can have. The sensory, this numbness, this tingling, burning sensations, sometimes electric sensations in the body. People, a lot of my patients may experience this and come with these symptoms at time of their first visit. And the good news is that these symptoms can be addressed with medication in particular. They usually don't respond well to regular common painkiller like ibuprofen or Tylenol, but we can decrease the intensity of those symptoms and sometimes really reduce them to the point that patients don't even notice these symptoms anymore with the help of other types of medications, usually anti-seizure medications or antidepressants. So common medications are gabapentin, duloxetine, pregabalin. Those are all kind of tools that we have in our toolbox to help folks with these symptoms. It's super important that people talk about those symptoms and how painful they are because those are not visible symptoms. So the neurologist might not know that you experience those symptoms unless you let them know. And so it's really important to bring this up to an initial visit because as we're working towards a diagnosis, we can prescribe the right medication for people to have relief.
So, as people are going through this diagnostic process, it's not unusual for them to experience feelings of uncertainty, fear. And I'm wondering whether you can recommend some strategies or resources that might help manage those feelings, as someone is waiting to be diagnosed.
I would say that the first step is to establish a trusting relationship with your care team, making sure that you know how to ask questions and how to reach out to your care team should you have any need. It's important to understand the timeline of tests and what to expect and what do the results mean, because this can really help alleviate a lot of the anxiety. I often find that learning about MS during this period of questioning and pre-diagnosis can help a lot of people, not all, but a lot of people. So I often recommend resources like the National MS Society website, your podcast, so that people can hear about, what it is like to be diagnosed with MS. Some people don't know anyone who has MS. They don't know what to expect. So this can give them really an understanding of our current understanding of multiple sclerosis and find hope in the resources that exist. I also recommend that people build a strong support system around them. It's important to have people who care, who can be there to listen to our fears and concerns and be there for us. And that can be family members, that can be friends, coworkers. Sometimes, people need to have a counselor, a professional that supports them. And if they don't have somebody in their life who can support them in this capacity, it's an important question to ask their care team, where can they find mental health support during that time?
Are there any lifestyle changes that someone could consider while they're in this pre-diagnosis stage?
Yeah, I often find that the first thing that's impacted by the anxiety and stress of this pre-diagnosis phase is sleep. And it's really important to make this time about rest and recovery, having a strong sleep hygiene, good routine, a sleep schedule. Really optimizing sleep is going to be important. You need to have sleep to really be able to understand the information that's given to you and feel hopeful, feel good again. Being able to be surrounded by a loved one, making sure that you don't cut yourself off from those who love you, but that you reach out for help. That doesn't mean, just being engaged in way too many social activities where you feel you have to perform. This is a time for you. This is a time that's critical for you. So really surrounding by people who are listening and who care about you. I often find that for those who can exercise, in spite of the symptoms they may be experiencing, that exercise can also help release some of the tension. So if that's helpful, having some kind of light, restorative exercise routine during that time can be helpful. For others, it'll be meditation, prayer, connecting, with their faith can be an important way to kind of cope and find that inner peace.
Fatigue is another common symptom of MS. It's reported that as many as 75 to 95% of all people with MS experience fatigue. Now, fatigue is more than just feeling a little tired. How would you define fatigue, and why is it so common in multiple sclerosis?
So fatigue is an overwhelming form of tiredness that people who don't know MS, who don't live with MS, I don't think we can fully understand. Even as a doctor who cares for people with MS on a day-to-day basis, I can have all the empathy of the world, but I don't know in my bones what it means to experience this overwhelming, crushing sense of fatigue that can be present from the morning, even after a long night's sleep, that can impact day-to-day activities, that can worsen with even just minimal activity, worsen with heat, other kind of factors as well. So it's really an invisible symptom that has a very significant impact on the quality of life and on the day-to-day activities of people with MS. Now, your second question was, why is it so common? And I wish I had an answer for you. I think that's $1 million question. My hypothesis is that, there's definitely a role of inflammation in this fatigue. We see fatigue even before the diagnosis of MS in that what we call prodromal phase, and that's related to this kind of dysregulated inflammation. And we see also fatigue in other inflammatory conditions. So I suspect inflammation has a role to play. And sometimes when we control the inflammation better, people can feel a little bit less tired. Researchers are also studying how fatigue can reflect how the brain is impacted by MS, how people who have fatigue require more brain areas to be involved to complete tasks than people who don't have fatigue. Even some researchers are looking are there areas of the brain that can be affected by MS that are directly linked to fatigue? But I don't think that we have truly answered that question at this time.
When it comes to managing fatigue, are there medications available? Are there alternative strategies or lifestyle modifications that can be used to help manage fatigue? What's there?
Yeah, this is also it's one of the most complicated aspect of MS management in my experience. Usually when I approach somebody who is living with MS fatigue, the first step for me is to try to explore and understand what other factors can exist that makes this fatigue worse, whether it is sleep apnea, mental health challenges and depression, sometimes physical deconditioning, and try to really address those first. Are there other superimposed condition and dysfunctioning thyroid, for instance, too? So I will run a battery of tests, may order a referral for a sleep clinic, and really try to understand, are they aggravating factors? Then, once we have ruled this out or treated these worsening factors, then we can really address the MS primary fatigue. We don't currently have medications that are FDA approved to treat MS fatigue, but we regularly use in our practice some medications that were developed for other conditions. So for instance, amantadine is a medication that was initially developed for Parkinson's disease that's routinely used. Modafinil, medication used to treat narcolepsy, is frequently used for people with MS. So again, this is kind of something that people can discuss with their neurologist, whether there's a specific medication that can be useful. I'm a big fan of non-pharmacological management of fatigue. I think this is super important. I know you interviewed my colleague and friend, Dr. Lisa Doggett, to talk about lifestyle modification. That would be a good episode to listen to. And she does an amazing job in our clinic in really addressing the symptom. And that's, there's several things that can help. First, optimizing sleep. making sure that, if sleep is interrupted by pain or other symptoms, can we treat that so that sleep is optimized? Can people have a good sleep routine, again, that they can rely on? But that's often not sufficient to help with fatigue. Exercise is also a big component of our managing of our approach to manage fatigue, and we frequently recommend regular exercise, low impact exercise, water exercises, particularly tailored to the abilities of our patients. Then there also need to be strategies to conserve energy. They're deciding what are activities worth doing. If shopping at the grocery store is not worth spending your energy on, order online. Delegate to team members or family members some kind of energy draining activities is an important component. Finding new ways to do things that don't use up your energy so that you can save it for the things that truly matter. So this is kind of a multi-step approach and often requires a lot of coaching and a lot of reflection. I recommend people keep a fatigue diary to really know what are the triggers and how they can really respond differently so that they have energy for their loved one, for themselves, and for the things they love to do.
Difficulty walking is one of the most common mobility limitations in MS. What's the first thing someone should do if they notice their gait or balance is off?
Talk to your doctor. People with MS can experience gait changes or imbalance for many different reasons. It may be related to MS. MS can cause weakness, stiffness, imbalance based on, where those lesions occur in the central nervous system. And is definitely a reason why people will have gait abnormalities. But there are also other reasons why people may experience some changes with their gait. Osteoarthritis is very common as people get older. Maybe that needs to be looked at. Sometimes people have neuropathy or vitamin deficiency causing some kind of nerve changes that also needs to be addressed. So the neurologist can really evaluate the type of gait changes that people experience and really think, is this MS, is this not MS? And then they can have a plan of care developed with their patients to be able to address that. Often we recommend physical therapy. Sometimes we use some medications, such as dalfampridine, to help people with their gait changes. It will be a multimodal approach. Also, something that I'm very, I think is really important for people to hear is that if you have difficulties with your gait and imbalance and you're falling, you need to have a system to alert in case of a fall, whether it is a life alert system that's, around the neck or in the home, whether it is a smartwatch that detects falls. I think this is really critical because falls can have a lot of complications that set people back.
Spasticity is another MS symptom that can be physically limiting and even painful. What is spasticity and how common is it in people living with MS?
So spasticity is a feeling of stiffness or spasm that can occur in any part of the body, usually limbs, that is related to demyelination or nerve damage along the motor tracts within the central nervous system, either in the brain or the spinal cord. And this spasticity it's fairly common in MS. It can range from very mild, occasional spasms to very severe, impacting one person's ability to walk or causing pain, as you said. But I would say that maybe around 40 to 80% of people with MS can experience during their lifetime some form of spasticity.
Joan is asking if there are specific triggers that might make spasticity worse.
Yeah, absolutely. First is, spasticity is a process of stiffness that will worsen with sudden movement and position change. So making sure that people relax their limbs slowly rather than abruptly is important. Also, people report that their spasticity worsen in the context of extreme temperature, humidity, or when they have a fever due to an infection, for example. I also find that constipation can be a trigger for spasticity that's often not talked about. And that's especially important because I've seen multiple people in my practice treated with opioid medication because of pain due to spasticity. And those medications can worsen constipation. And we go into this cycle of worsened spasticity and constipation, where in truth, we need to get people off these medications and on the proper treatment for their spasticity.
Well, can you talk about some of the complications of spasticity if it's left untreated?
Yeah, there's multiple one. I would say that one that's really important is pain. Spasticity can cause pain due to acute spasms, or it can cause pain due to a constant feeling of tightness. And this can disrupt people's sleep, prevent them from, doing their day-to-day activities, and it can be very, very debilitating. Also, spasticity can impair one's gait. When people have difficulty with their movement, where their limbs are not as flexible, they have difficulty with walking, that can lead to falls. Also, in extreme cases of spasticity, we can see that people cannot move their joints as smoothly, and that can lead to more permanent deformation, often at the feet or at the hands. So those are all things to look for.
Well, you shared some really useful information that should make identifying some of the signs and symptoms of MS easier. And you've shared some excellent steps for being proactive during the diagnostic process. Let me ask you, what would you say are the top 3 takeaways that you'd like our viewers to remember?
Well, first is that MS symptoms vary from person to person, and that many symptoms of MS are invisible. So open up about what you feel and what you're experiencing. The second point I'd like to make is that your neurologist, your doctor, and your care team are there to help you with your symptoms, not just prescribe disease-modifying therapies. Part of your plan of care should be addressing these symptoms with either medication or non-pharmacological approaches. And then the third point I'd like to make is relates to what we talk about with regard to falls. And falls can really set people with MS back and have multiple complications. And people need to know that they can use alert system to be able to alert others in the context of a fall.
I want to thank everyone who submitted some great questions, and thank you, Dr. Freeman, for being with us today.
It's my pleasure to be with you, John. Thank you for the invitation.
Before we close, I want to remind you that the National MS Society's MS Navigator team is your best partner when it comes to connecting you to the very best information and resources on living with MS. You can reach an MS Navigator by phone, email, or through the Society's website by chat. For information and resources on MS, please visit the Society's website. You'll find research updates and news, information on connection programs like self-help groups and MS Friends. You'll hear about ways that you can get involved, and you'll find out about upcoming events that are taking place near you. Remember, you can connect with the National MS Society and others affected by MS on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And I hope you'll join me every week on the Real Talk MS podcast, where I continue the conversation that we start here. You'll find Real Talk MS at realtalkms.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. I'd like to thank Dr. Freeman for joining us today. Please remember that a recording of this webcast will be available at the Society's website at nationalmssociety.org/MSexpert, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. I hope you'll join us at this same time for next week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. You can always find our upcoming program topics on the National MS Society's website. And now I have a favor to ask each of you. Getting your feedback on today's webcast is important. So if you're watching on Facebook Live, you'll see a link to a survey pinned to the comments section. On YouTube, you'll find that link in the program description. And on Twitch, you can find that link in the chat. Completing the survey makes a real difference. The information you provide helps us continuously improve, and it helps shape future programs. The survey takes just 1 minute, so I hope you'll take a minute to fill it out. On behalf of Dr. Léorah Freeman and the National MS Society, I want to thank you once again for joining us. Please stay safe and make healthy choices.